Hello and welcome to another edition of the AgriSolutions Cropland Genetics Crop Camp. I'm Mark Oman. Today I have with me Dan Utek, grain merchandiser from New Vision Co-op. We want to talk a little bit about grain storage. We've been through a lot of moisture conversations on soybeans and corn, looking at some molds and some different issues that we've been having. Dan, could you help us out with some soybean quick questions today? Some do's and don'ts with the soybeans that are in the bins, but what should we be thinking about going forward?
Well, as everyone knows, the crop came out of the field, higher moisture content than normal. What we're looking at are probably soybeans that are 14 to 15% and below. Those are pretty storable, but we're going to want to watch them closely, especially as you come out of corn harvest. Maintain the aeration. One thing that we've learned in talking to people in trying to store these wetter crops, when you're trying to keep the beans and just kind of in a refrigeration type mode, we want to be putting the cool night air through those beans to keep the grain cool. But if you let that fan run all day, you're going to be drawing the heat of the day in. So you're drawing heat during the day, cool at night, and you end up with zero effect. You don't actually cool the grain down. So you want to get that, probably run the fans only at night if you're trying to refrigerate or just maintain quality on those wetter beans from 14 to 15%. On soybeans above 15%, which we're going to call the real wet ones, there's still some out there in the country, 16, 17% we've heard. My word today on those would be as soon as you're done with corn harvest, you need to be checking those very closely. Make sure you're keeping those fans running at night to keep them cool down. Watch for any crusting or any problems in those bins and probably move those beans to town as soon as you can as we get into the winter months and definitely before spring because they're going to be tough to store.
Great, great. So some good things to think about on soybeans there. Now moving to corn, a lot of you guys are still active in harvesting corn and storing corn and drying and handling it. So some ideas here, Dan, on corn drying. Say a guy's going right to an air bin. What should we do there?
Okay. Right to an air bin, then you're going to be just reverse what we were talking about as far as soybeans. You want some heat going into that bin because you're going to need some heat to dry that wet corn and push the front through. So just the opposite, rather than running the fans at night, if you want heat going into that bin to do some natural drying, run the fans during the day when you have some warmer air to push that in. And then at night you shut that fan off because if you let it continue to run, then you're going to cool down the heat that you've started. So run the fans during the day. If you want to dry in the bin naturally, shut the fans off at night.
Great, great. Okay, so that's the air bin situation. Now, a guy's got a bin, a holding bin, and maybe it's going to be a day or 4 days before he can get to the dryer. How do we handle that corn, Dan?
Now you're back to the refrigeration mode like we talked about on soybeans. Run the fans at night to keep the cool air going through the bin and to keep the grain fresh before it goes to the dryer. Shut it off during the day because you really don't want to start a hot spot or a little bit of drying in that bin before it gets to the dryer.
Okay, great. So now another situation is we've been through the dryer and now we're going to store this dried corn.
Right.
What are some tips to do throughout the winter? Maybe this corn's going to be tried to stored through the summer months. What can we expect out of that?
First thing you're going to want to do, and I think this is real important because the crop this year is a little bit on the immature side, which means we have a little bit lighter test weight to worry about and also higher FM. So the first thing you're going to want to do on that dry corn that's been put into a bin is core the bin. And a rule of thumb there is to take out about 10% of the capacity of the bin. So if it's a 35,000 bushel bin, pull out between 4,000 and 5,000 bushel. As soon as you get done with harvest, if you've got some livestock to feed that to, it probably would be good because there's going to be high FM in that corn. If you take it to the elevator, you may get surprises because we've heard some guys haul stuff in and it can be anywhere from 10 to 12% FM. Once you get through about the 10% of that bin, it's going to clear up and be beautiful corn. But if you don't take that out going into the storage months, the winter, the summer, the spring, you're going to probably have some problems where the air is not going to go through that part because of the high FM, and potential for molding and quality problems is definitely there.
Great. Well, that makes sense, Dan. One more thing on corn drying I want to talk about. Some guys have been caramelizing some corn, pushing the heat to it a little too much. What are some temperature ranges and some do's and don'ts as far as watching this corn drying this fall?
Okay, we've done a lot of research going into harvest and educated our guys in the elevators, and here's our game plan this year. And this comes from both the University of Minnesota and Iowa State, which are a couple of pretty good sources for information. What you want to try and do is avoid taking that dryer temperature much over 180 degrees. And by doing that, you'll keep the grain temperature down in the dryer at about 130 or less. That will reduce your stress cracks in the corn, which will keep the FM down. and will also maximize the test weight gain that you have as that corn is dried. And we've been experimenting with that and doing that with all the New Vision dryers since harvest started, and we are seeing definite improvement in the test weights, where it's coming in at 51 to 52 pounds, it's coming out of the dryer at 54 to 55, and versus the FM being high, it's coming out at 2% or less. So I think it works. What you have to do, though, is have a lot of patience if you're going to dry corn at 180 degrees, because it's going to cut your dryer capacity down to probably a third to a half of what you normally would like to see. But you have to do that. You got one chance to plant the crop right. You got one chance to dry it right.
Great. No, you're exactly right. So there's a lot of topics and questions that we've had on corn and soybean storage this fall, and hopefully we wrapped them up for you today. And thank you, Dan, on behalf of New Vision Co-op, Dan Utek, the grain merchandiser there. And you can only find this on us104.net.